Our facilitator for this evening will be Hilary Joffe. She is the editor-at-large at A Business Day.
S&P Global Ratings took us over the edge of the investment grade cliff into junk status. Moody's put us on watch for a downgrade, and at the end of that week, Fitch took both our foreign and our local currency ratings down to junk status. Let me start by introducing the man of the moment, Gardner Rusika from S&P Global Ratings.
When we assess sovereign ratings, we look at the willingness and ability of governments to repay debt in full and on time. Institutional and political assessment, the economic assessment, the external assessment, the fiscal and debt assessment, as well as the monetary assessment. The institutional and economic assessments have a higher weighting because they are combined together. A rating is a relative measure of credit worthiness. So we have a scale from AAA to D, which is default. So we started rating South Africa in 1994 at the BB level, which is non-investment grade, and was upgraded into investment grade, I think, around 2000. And they stayed in investment grade up until April 2017. Some of the pressure points on the ratings have come through from the institutional and political settings, the economic assessment, as well as the fiscal and debt trajectory. One of South Africa's Achilles heel has been about economic growth. The executive changes that were made by the president, divisions, the infighting that's been happening in the ANC, what it does is to bring uncertainty, is to weaken business confidence and potentially reduce the level of private investments that you could have seen that would support a higher path of GDP growth. There are a number of state-owned enterprises which have got weak balance sheets which require financial support from the government. A review of the February 2016 budget and the February 2017 budget, you will see that government guarantees to state-owned enterprises, there is quite a significant increase. And also that the projections going into the medium term into 2020 are also at a much higher level. So that places at risk the government's balance sheet. And there have not been strong decisions to place them on a firmer financial footing. Government working together with business, with labor, which to some extent would reduce some of those protracted strikes, having a relationship that can help improve business confidence, that can help improve investment decisions, may have been reduced, if not broken down, because of the changes that were effected. So it's going to take a lot more. Perhaps businesses are going to be more cautious in their investment decisions. This heads on South Africa's GDP growth, which is South Africa's Achilles heel, and it will impact on the tax revenues that government can generate in order to be able to do fiscal consolidation.
South Africa, we've got about a savings rate of about 15% of GDP. We're running down our capital stock at a depreciation rate of about 15%. The fact that you've been downgraded doesn't mean that you can't get capital, but it does mean that the cost of that capital actually rises. If the sovereign gets downgraded, then the institutions below it also get downgraded. So the provinces, the state-owned enterprises, the banks get downgraded, then basically borrowing costs rise for them, and they have to actually pass on higher borrowing costs to businesses and basically to the consumer. Over the last decade or so, foreigners have built up a position of about 35% of government debt. They own 35% of our RAND debt. And RAND debt is about 1.7 trillion rands. Our current forecast for this year is about 0.7%, so like another 1%. It's roughly 100 billion rand. We've got a 4.7 trillion economy, 100 billion rand. Well, it's a huge, huge, huge number.
South African 10-year bond in the European market has become the fourth most traded bond in Europe. The inflows that are coming admittedly towards all emerging market countries are also finding their way into South Africa. It's quite an interesting outcome in South Korea that they let go of state-owned enterprises, they let them fail. And that's what's required, because for them, it was only 12 months to stay in junk. a toxic political situation can prolong things.
We are currently rated by Moody's. They are currently reviewing us. Inevitably, they will downgrade us. Our budget is around 60 billion. Per year, we borrow around 7% of our budget. Amongst others, so we've got two major responsibilities: to provide infrastructure, but also social services. With this downgrading, there's going to be a lot of negativity towards what we do.
We need to get this into perspective. The rand today is where it was in February and is 20% higher than it was a year ago. A personal economic advisor has been seconded to the new Minister of Finance, who immediately went out about and wrote articles calling for the nationalization of mines, banks, insurance companies, and the expropriation of land without compensation, which smacks of a desire to change economic policy 180 degrees. On the other hand, we are told by Malusi Gigaba, and in fact on one occasion the week before last by President Zuma himself, no, we have no intention to change fiscal policy. So then why was Pravin Gordhan replaced if there was no intention to change fiscal policy? That is the uncertainty that prevails and why business confidence is really, really vulnerable. And what scares me is that if the worst case scenario does materialize, then indeed the rand will collapse and we will face a full-blown recession, not this year, but next year.
Because a country has a level of fiscal policy and a central bank, you rarely default on your local currency outright. But the one that is issued in foreign currency, mainly in dollars, and that's the 10%. So when we say junk, we're referring to only the 10%. But this distinguish that comes from rating agencies sometimes is because in history what we found, governments easily default on foreign currency debt because it's just easier to tell foreigners, sorry, I'm not paying you. and the legal structures of how you recoup that money as an investor is very complex. And in there, they say only when Moody's and Standard & Poor's on the local currency downgrade us into junk, then you could see asset managers who are replicating the benchmark weights having to be forced to sell. And then we're talking numbers between 6 billion to 10 billion US dollars. So it is quite ominous when we're sitting at the cusp from Standard & Poor's, and there is a risk if we don't have an agile response from Treasury.
This year, there's been a lot of talk about radical economic transformation, right? And you don't see as yet the translation into the budget framework or into the government policy. Between 2014 and 2017, South Africa has had how many finance ministers? Right? What is the objective?
During the years where the city spent more on capital projects, the economy of Johannesburg grew more. When the city spent less, the economy grew lesser.
But I think the real impact comes through lower personal disposable income growth. I think there was a point being made by the previous finance minister who was saying, look, for him radical economic transformation is really broadening economic activity so that people get employed, that you can drive unemployment down. But instead what we are finding is that a smaller and smaller portion are getting a bigger piece of the pie. If you look at the Chinese economy, when did it explode? That's when it actually moved away from state control towards public enterprise.
I would do exactly what the Chinese do. They have private partners together with the government, and immediately you have oversight of them.
We have had so many contradictory definitions of this radical economic transformation. There's now a linkage between radical economic transformation and expropriation of land. We still need a proper land audit, because the large chunks of land in this country is owned by government.
Cameron resigned and they went downgraded from the gentleman at the top there. I think the point is he resigned.
He says, should Zuma resigned? I don't know, because I feel very, very conflicted. Because if it were not for the opposition nationally, now governing the city, if it were not for our chief campaigner, President Zuma, I wouldn't be here.
There are different shades of growth. You can get rootless growth, in other words, you get foreigners coming, decimating local cultures, etc., which prove to be fruitless growth. You can get growth that is futureless, environmentally unfriendly. People just erect mines everywhere that destroys the environment but generate growth. Or you can get growth that is exploitive, right? We come from that history for the longest time. No one needs to spend a lot more time on that. Therefore, transformation and GDP are not mutually exclusive. They are interwoven, they are one and the same thing. I never want to see either the IMF or anyone, including the Chinese, giving us money for that which we can do ourselves.